Okay, I see we have a good number of attendees coming in right now, so we're probably just going to go ahead and get started. This is Cybersecurity Case Studies Part 2, which, traditionally has been kind of a potpourri of different real life case studies of how end users are, deploying OT and industrial level cybersecurity in real life. And we have very good examples today from our three presenters um, on topics ranging from everything to, how do we build a better cybersecurity strategy in this age of digital transformation and industrial IoT technologies coming into manufacturing and sort of merging IT and OT cybersecurity departments to dealing with regulatory compliance issues to dealing with trust and verification of software from industrial vendors and from a wide range of vendors, really, which is a key problem given the supply chain attacks that we've witnessed recently with solar winds and so forth. So we have a lot of good topics today. I just want to go ahead and briefly introduce everybody that's going to be presenting and on our panel discussion. We have a really packed panel today with a lot of really good experts. I want to start by introducing Mario Chiock, who's CISO Emeritus and fellow Schlumberger. Um, he was responsible at Schlumberger for developing Schlumberger's worldwide cybersecurity strategy and cybersecurity transformation program. He started a cloud security team and a next-gen SOC. Mario served on the advisory boards of Palo Alto Networks, Qualys, Onapsis, Cofense, and Clearden. He was also involved in the creation of the ONG ISAC. We also have with us Mark Prince, who is a consultant at Entergy. Mark has 41 years of experience with Entergy's power plant operations. Most recently, the manager of fossil cybersecurity and compliance. Um, Now he's a consultant and he brings expertise in various cybersecurity areas, including process control, network segmentation, NERC SIP requirements for power sites, and power plant related cyber related implementation and management. Um, our third presenter is Brian Owen, who is a security architect at OSI Soft. Hello, Brian. Brian is at OSI Soft, as I said, makers of the Pi system and LF Edge Foundation's member, fostering IIoT innovation. He's an ambassador for advancing state-of-the-art practices for industrial software security and critical infrastructure protection, and is also active in public-private partnerships through collaboration with DHS and CISA and DOE and the national labs and other supply chain security working groups. He serves on industry advisory boards and is a voting member for ISA 99 standards. Uh, we have Del Rodias. He's Director of Critical Infrastructure and Manufacturing Cybersecurity Solutions at Palo Alto Networks. Del leads a global team of security experts focused on thought leadership and security solution architectures for IT and OT industries. He has 25 plus years of industry experience that spans industrial cybersecurity, telecommunications, aerospace and defense, and high-tech manufacturing, with roles in business strategy and engineering. He's also GISP certified. And we have Eric Byers, CEO of Adolis Technology. You've probably heard of Eric if you've been in the ICS or SCADA cybersecurity space for any length of time. He invented the Tofino security technology, which is the most widely deployed ICS-specific firewall in the world. And today he is working with Adolis, who is doing some very interesting things in the terms, in the realm rather, of verifying the trust and security of software updates. We're going to hear a lot more about that as well. We have John Livingston, who is the CEO of Verve Industrial Protection. John leads Verve's mission to help protect the world's infrastructure. He brings 20 plus years of experience with McKinsey and Company, advising large companies in their strategy and operations. John saw his clients struggling to deal with opportunities and challenges of greater industrial connectivity and is now committed to helping clients find the lowest cost and simplest solutions to their controls, data, and ICS security challenges. And last but not least, we have Matt Selheimer, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of PAS. Good afternoon, Matt. He directs marketing at PAS and is responsible for expanding awareness of the PAS value proposition and driving demand for PAS solutions to ensure safety and reliability in the face of unprecedented risk and cyber threats. So good morning, everybody. Thank you. I want to thank this esteemed panel and our presenters for joining us today. And we are going to start with three 20-minute or so presentations. And when we're done with those presentations, we are going to go back to video and all of us are going to join the panel discussion. I encourage people to ask questions in our Q&A box, which is in the menu toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You can also talk and chat, but for questions for the panel, we're going to be really looking into that Q&A box. So if you have questions for us, make sure you enter those into the Q&A box. And any unanswered questions that we will have will go into the ARC vFairs networking area, where we also have a chat channel dedicated to cybersecurity. So if you want to ask further questions of the people on our panel, and I encourage our panelist speakers as well to go into that chat channel and interact with people and try and answer some of these questions that we may not get to. Our last session, actually, we had to cut it off and we probably had about 20 unanswered questions. So I'm sure that'll probably be useful for people. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Mario Chiock, who is our first speaker. So Mario, if you could share your presentation and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, can you see my?
I can see your screen just fine, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, let me start by saying that every digital transformation, it requires a cybersecurity digital transformation. Because my experience, I started a digital transformation program about 9 years ago, and having cybersecurity as an afterthought is very painful. So you want to make sure that you start a digital transformation program with cybersecurity from the get-go. I often say that a digital transformation program without cybersecurity in it is going to be a very insecure digital transformation. So make sure that you include cybersecurity in your digital transformation program. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to outline some of the basic challenges today. And at the end of my slides, I will try to talk through some of the areas that has covered some of the solutions or case studies that I had to solve some of these issues. So the first item is that there is no more perimeters. A few years ago, we used to put a firewall and we used to say we're going to protect the crown jewels inside the firewall, and it was fine. However, in the last few years, there has been a lot of advancements in technology, cloud, that's all types of cloud, whether it is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, is now available from anywhere. So there is no longer a perimeter. Smartphones are out there connected all the time. Shadow IT is very easy to actually put up a server out somewhere with just a credit card. And as we all know, in the last year, work from home has become the norm, not exception. So we need to make sure that we do something about perimeter. There is no perimeter. However, I often mention that our identity in the case of humans or entities in the case of devices is the new perimeter. The next one is about the lack of visibility. Many times, many things get put up and people are not saying much about it. And the people responsible for security has no visibility of what's out there. Too many silos, a very good example is IT and OT, but I could also extend that to the cloud. They need to work together. And one of the things that I did is I brought together everybody working in IT, OT, and in the cloud, especially for cybersecurity, into a single umbrella. And the amount of synergies and amount of collaboration was great in order to be able to be ahead. Shortage of cybersecurity talent, that's another one that is very important. Today, we already start having shortage. There will be worse. But even if you do find the people, they are very, very expensive. So we need to make sure that we have a strategy for the future about cybersecurity talent. Cybersecurity is not a technology problem, it's a business problem. This is a problem that I have often seen because many people perceive cybersecurity as a technology only problem. And I believe that it's more than just a technology problem and it needs to be solved. And I have solved those issues with governance and proper processes and collaborations with stakeholders. And then the last one is about dependence on third-party suppliers and partners. We're going to have them. We just need to make sure that we have the proper controls and checks and balances for them. So going into the next slide, this is a very nice slide from Science Institute that he actually talks about people, process, and technology. I just want to emphasize that in a large company or a small company, IT and OT needs to work together under a single umbrella. You need to have a single pane of glass. Not only that, but attackers are going to go after the easiest, the weakest link. So you need to make sure that either OT and IT are strong together. The next thing is about people. People are the first line of defense, and we need to make sure that we educate our people. We need to, I have a deeper slide on people, process, and technology. Process, you need to make sure that there is a lot of automation and simplification of processes. When I first started 20 plus years ago in cybersecurity, we used to get our security expert building the process, and they build very complicated process. In the last 10 years, I have been working very hard to actually simplify the process and make it a lot easier. One of the things that I found out is that if you make it too complicated, people are going to bypass it. So you need to make sure that processes are simple, and adding user experience into it is very important. And the last one, but not the least, is the technology. You need to make sure that as technology evolves, you're using the right type of technologies. A very good example is you cannot be using traditional endpoint or data center technologies in the cloud. Okay, so moving forward into people, I believe one of the most important things on people is to make sure that we build that cybersecurity culture. I often think of HSE, health, safety, and environment, where we need to adopt this HSE culture into cybersecurity, because it's not about doing being secure because we are being told. We just need to do the right thing for the right reasons. In the case of HSE, a good example is, using a safety belt. You want to use, a few years back, we used to use a safety belt because, it was either company policy or it was the law. Today, most people just automatically use a safety belt because they know that they're going to they could save their life by wearing a safety belt. With cybersecurity, it's very simple, it's very similar, and we need to make sure that we have that culture. The first thing that you need to do to start changing the culture is by raising the awareness. And having a good awareness is very important. I would start with the phishing simulations, but also doing a few other things, such as I developed something called the cyber moments. So on large meetings, we used to start with a safety moments. Now we have cyber moments in order to go over over tips or something that has happened on the cyber world. And then the next thing that I have on awareness is a program that I built, which is called the Friends and Family Program, Cybersecurity Friends and Family. Basically, the program was about building material that every one of our employees could take home and they could share it with their friends and families. And they became a cybersecurity experts around their friends and family. This was a very successful program. I highly recommend that to everyone. And then the next item that I have it was a big learning was about training. When we first started with cybersecurity, we wanted to build a training program, cybersecurity training program for everyone in the company. And that did not scale because there were different needs and different issues that you needed to address. For example, the HR people, they handle PII. We needed to teach them how to protect PII. Finance people, they handle money. We needed to alert them about fraud and scams and so on and so forth. And then software developers, for example, we needed to teach them on how to secure code. So training, you need to have a different type of training depending what you do. Cybersecurity risk program, at the beginning, I used to have a program that was 100% cybersecurity, but we did not have enough people, money, and resources to do everything. So we had to prioritize based on risk. So I highly recommend to do a multi-year cyber risk mitigation program and start addressing based on risk. Um, Equally important, when I built the next generation SOC, in the past, in our SOC, we used to address the alerts first in, first out, and that was not very effective. And we decided to build an algorithm to select the alert, the high risk alerts first, as well as some of the easy ones to do. And that way, not every single, the first alert that come in is the first one that's being addressed. We were addressing the alerts based on the risk and the criticality. Cybersecurity roles and responsibilities is very important to make sure that everybody understands that they are going to be responsible and accountable for something related to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity strategy, we started initially having different strategies, different groups. IT has its own, OT has its own, different parts of the business has their own. And that did not work very well because everybody was stepping on each other and it was not a consistent strategy. So one of my recommendation is to make sure that you have a global single cybersecurity strategy for the whole company that includes everybody, everything, all the way up to vendors, third parties. Innovation is one of those things that I also learned that technology changes over time. And just because you use a firewall or an antivirus 20 years ago, that's no longer effective enough. You need to continuous change and you need to use some of the newer technologies, as well as you need to train people in a different way. One of the methodologies that I push a lot these days for cybersecurity training and awareness is gamification. Very much create a game and learn and do small things at a time versus trying to do one big class that everybody will forget very quickly. Cybersecurity policies are very important. You need to start with them and evolve them. Cybersecurity rewards, rewarding people for that outstand on things that they do is very important. You need to make sure that those people are rewarded. I created programs, including things like a scholarship program, where people that work in certain parts of the company, not necessarily on cybersecurity, they will get a scholarship to take a specific cybersecurity classes, or something as simple as just a plaque or a jacket is also very important. A couple of more things. Cybersecurity hygiene, I think, is basic. Doesn't have to cost a lot of money to do cybersecurity hygiene. And a lot of the breaches could be avoided by just doing cybersecurity hygiene. And the last one on people is make sure that you work with user experience people to address that anything that you do in cybersecurity is going to be easy for every user. And one of my latest programs was to minimize passwords just to make it easier on the end users. So if there is one thing I would like you to take out of people area is that just like in HSE, cybersecurity is the job of everyone, including contractors and vendors, and everybody needs to be available. I normally uh, say that people are the first line of defense, and they're like a human sensor that we want them to tell us. There are our eyes and ears out there that they need to tell us if they see something suspicious. The next one is about process, and process needs to change. One of the first things that I did when I was doing the digital transformation program was to redo all the process. To I started with simplifying process, eliminating process that are not needed, but also having process where you have everything together. You needed to have a good inventory of all the assets. If you don't have an inventory of the asset, you will never know what you need to protect. You need to have a single security dashboard, single pane of glass, where you're going to see everything across the company. And that is very important. Cybersecurity policies, they need to be uh, global for the whole company. You do not want to have a business unit or a segment of the company to have one policy and another one a different policy. It needs to be global. You need to have standards and guidelines that will tell you what are the standard tools to use and what are the guidelines on how to configure it and secure keeping them. Uh, Cybersecurity certifications are very important, not only for people to be certified, but also for processes and systems and software. And ourselves, I got into the problem that every customer wanted to do a security assessment of our systems and everything that we do. And I actually start doing certifications, and I start doing ISO certifications and SOC 2, type 1, type 2 certifications in order to avoid having to get audited by all of our customers. So we will just give them the certifications, and that saves me a lot of time. One of the other things that is very important is that cyber is a 24/7, and you need to monitor, and you need to have an operations team around the clock that are going to be monitoring everything. Everything moves very, very, very quickly. If you wait a few hours, it may be, something that could have been avoided or be very small could be very big. So you need to make sure you have a 24/7 security operations that is monitored. Whether you have it yourself or you outsource it to somebody is fine, but you need to make sure that you cannot just have the information there and one shift looking at it. Cybersecurity auditing, this is very important. I encourage the company to have both internal auditors and external auditors to come in and audit your cybersecurity. Enforcement. If you do have a cybersecurity policy, you need to make sure that you can enforce it. Having a policy that you cannot enforce is useless. It might as well don't have it. Cybersecurity automation and orchestration. This is a very important. I have a great case study on it. I was able to save a lot of tickets. We went from having an average of 800 alerts a month being followed by our security operations center to about 8,000. It's not that we had more, It's just that before we didn't have enough cycles to do it. So by automating and orchestrating, we were able to do that. We use a tool called the Misto that has been acquired by Palo Alto Networks, I believe, last year. But we implemented this about 3 years ago, and it has been very, very successful. Not only to save us time, but also to keep our people happy. Our analysts now they don't have to worry about doing the boring stuff and the repetitious stuff. They're only doing the new fun stuff of the new cyber threats or hunting instead of just doing the basic stuff. Drills, cyber drills. This is one that I think is very important. And there is a lot of people don't like to do drills because they feel they're going to fail. A drill is not about failing or passing. Drill is about learning what you are good at and what you're not good at it so you can improve. And the last one, but is probably one of the most important, is you need to build cybersecurity governance. As an example of cybersecurity governance, you need to, I have just this slide, I'm not going to go in detail, but you need to start with business objectives. And once you have the business objectives, you need to make sure that you work in collaboration with the executive and management, supply chain, legal, HR, etc., to make sure that you have the proper staff, the proper budget, the plans, training, bills, and even sunset equipment. When we were doing our digital transformation program, one of the big problems that I found is that it's very, very difficult to sunset something old. And my point was, if we're going to do something the new way, at some point, we're going to have to get rid of the old stuff. So this is very important to do that. And then the main purpose of the governance, which is not just security people, is a lot of business people, is to standardize the process. Everybody needs to have a standardized process. You don't have to have the same tools, but you need to have standard tools that are used. IT tools may or may not be used on OT. OT tools may or may not be used in IT. However, you cannot use every single tool out there. There are way too many tools. You need to reduce the number of tools that you do by standardizing and creating expertise on it. And then you need to have global policies. Okay, from the technology perspective, one of the big things is that you need to focus on protection, but technology is moving and there's going to be a time that something is going to fall through the cracks, and you need to make sure your detection is there so you can detect. Detecting a breach few days later is already too late. And my understanding is that the average detection in some companies, it could be months or years. So I just want to make sure detection is very important. And once you detect, you need to know what to do with it. So a few years ago, I implemented an incident response. I implemented an intrusion detection system. And the intrusion detection system was creating so many alerts, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I learned very quickly that you need to create a incident response team that is going to take care of the detections and do something with it, because be able to detect and do nothing with it is completely useless. One thing which is very, very important these days is to be able to share intelligence, cyber threat intelligence. And you can do that in multiple ways. There is public-private collaborations groups. There is something called in the US, the InfraGard. This is very, very good. There is some paid commercial subscriptions for threat intelligence, but there is also the ISACs, and most industries have some ISACs out there. I am very familiar with the ONG ISAC, oil and natural gas. I'm one of the founders of this ISAC, and for me has been very, very beneficial to be able to know both ways. Number one is when we find something, we share it with the ISAC, and when somebody else finds it, they share it with us, so we all can be alerted and we can prioritize those things. Cyber security forensics is also very important. You need to make sure you have some kind of capabilities, whether they're in-house or outside. You need to, if you outsource your forensics, you need to make sure you have a proper contracts, because when you need them, they may not be available to do it. So you need to keep, if you have a external forensics, you'll make sure you have some kind of retainer on it. Cybersecurity architecture is very important. I heard often that we have architects for different things: IT, OT, business application, infrastructure. But you need to make sure that those architects work very closely with the cybersecurity architects. And one of the things that I am pushing in the last year or so is something called zero trust. And I will talk a little bit more about zero trust. But that is also very, very, very important. Endpoint security is very old, but you still need to have some kind of endpoint security. You need to make sure that you don't keep things that you don't need in the endpoints, and you make sure that you don't open all the ports that you don't need. Perimeter security, like I mentioned before, there is no more perimeter anymore, but you still have some kind of limited perimeter, and you need to make sure that you have that secure, as well as something called the VPN or the software-defined perimeter that allows the right people in and to do the things that they need to do. Application security, if you develop software, you need to make sure that you do have a group that takes care of application security. If you don't develop software, you still need to make sure that you have a group that's going to vet the applications, commercial applications or SaaS applications, to make sure that they are secure before you use them. Data security is also very important. You need to make sure that the data whether is always protected, regardless whether it is at the endpoint, whether it's at the transmission or in the data center or in the cloud. You need to make sure it's protected, and it's protected the same way that needs to be done by the application. Interfaces are new, and this is a new challenge, because a lot of the new technologies are communicating via interfaces. You need to make sure these interfaces are secure, and even more important, these interfaces keys, which are equivalent to a password, are constantly rotated. You cannot keep a key forever. You need to rotate them. And then cloud is something that is also very important, and cloud is not the same as traditional data center, and we need to make sure it's treated separately. And last one is about cyber using artificial intelligence, analytics, and machine learning for cybersecurity is also very, very, very important. And I, as part of the digital transformation, cybersecurity digital transformation program, we work very closely with data scientists to be able to use cybersecurity data in order to come up with the right analytics and be able to reduce false positive and raise confidence levels of alerts. So the message here is you need to use the right tool for the right job. You do not want to use the wrong tools, and this happens quite often. I see it a lot. So zero trust architecture, if you're going to do something today, I strongly recommend that you get, if you have not already done, a start. It's going to take a long time. It's a journey, and you need to make sure that you start zero trust architecture from the very, very beginning. And the sooner you do it, the better off you're going to be. And zero trust is about not trusting nothing: devices, users, workloads, networks, and data. For example, on devices, we have company managed devices. They have more access to do things. And there are some things that you cannot do unless it's a company managed device, like accessing privileged access areas, networks, or systems. Users, you need to make sure users are properly validated, multi-factor authentication. Workloads is the new term. There is no longer servers, because a lot of processing in the cloud is done via workloads, containers, etc. And the networks now, you have a lot of networks, and many of the networks are not your networks. It could be a network in the cloud, for example. And the data, and there is huge amount of data lakes. And data lakes for me have been a nightmare because you need to make sure that the data, regardless what it is going to have the same controls that it has as they have in the application, as well as verifying everything, validate the device, verify the user. You make sure that you have limited access and you have limited privileges. A very good example of this is something like VPN. Many times you can VPN to the corporate network, and doesn't matter who you are, you just have access to the corporate network. In the zero trust architecture, you will know who you are, whether you're coming with a company-owned device, and it will limit your access to what you need to have, no more, no less, and that is. And I use a technology called Prisma from Palo Alto Networks to actually be able to segment and restrict. So you can have access to the OT network and not to the IT network, as well as the IT network and not to the OT network. And even there, in the OT network, you may have access to one plant, not all the plants in the world, right? So this is, you have to control this in a very granular way. So moving on, takeaways. You need to have a holistic approach to cybersecurity strategy. IT, OT, cloud data, shadow IT, and third parties, they all need to have one single cybersecurity strategy. Create awareness and training throughout the organization. Doesn't have to be the same training, and you need to change that training depending on what the end users do. Developers require different type of training. Privileged users require different type of training, and even executives require some kind of training. So monitor and measure cybersecurity 24/7. Look at what works, what doesn't work, and constantly be updating and changing. One of the good examples is exemptions. If you do have a policy and that policy always have an exemption, maybe that's not a good policy. You need to change that policy so you don't have to have that many exemptions. You need to make sure that you analyze them based on teams, groups, trends, and make sure that when you do drills, who does well, who doesn't do well, and who needs additional training. Make sure that you simplify, automate, and prioritize. This is a strategy that I use to do that, and I start using a lot of tools to orchestrate and automate things that you can do. Start with cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene does not need to cost a lot of money, so you should start with cyber hygiene. Start with basic things like strong passwords, rotation of password, multi-factor authentication, backups, things like that. Cybersecurity is the job of everyone. This is about changing the culture, and everybody needs to feel responsible and accountable for cybersecurity. Being compliant does not ensure being secure. This is very important because many times people say, well, but I am compliant and I follow all the rules that makes me secure. That's not true. But equally important is that being secure does not make you compliant. So you need to be compliant and secure. And the last one is about cybersecurity is a direction. It's not a destination. So you need to, just because you did something today doesn't mean that you're going to be okay tomorrow. You need to continuously be changing. And on my last slide, I'm going to put the same slide that I put at the beginning, where I showed that most of my challenges are addressed by using the right tools and using the right architecture. Specifically myself, I use Prisma for many of these things, and I'm starting to deploy the zero trust architecture, which is helping a lot. It's not easy and it's not going to be fast, but you need to start somewhere, and the sooner you start, the better you're going to be. The next one is about shortage of cybersecurity and talent. I have addressed that a lot by using the MISTO for automation and orchestration. And then the last one is about cybersecurity. It's not a technology problem, it's a business problem. as well as dependence and on third parties, suppliers and partners, I have addressed them with governance. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So that's all I have for you, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. That was a really great presentation, a ton of information in there. I'm sure we're going to have questions from the audience, and I encourage people to enter those questions into the Q&A field. We are going to hand the con over now to Mark Prince. So Mark, if you could start sharing your presentation, we'll move right on with you.
All right, you should be able to see it now.
Yep. And Mario, we need you to take off your video, and we'll have Mark on video. Thank you.
Okay.
Now we can see you now. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mario, and please welcome Mark Prince.
Hey, good job, Mario, by the way. And as I watched your presentation, I realized about 80, in my world, in the utility industry with SIP requirements, about 80% of everything in your presentation is federal law. We don't have a choice but to do it. And, you know, like you said, it's picking the right things to do. My name is Mark Prince. I've been in the utility industry, strictly power plants, instrument controls for about 41 years. About 10 or 11 years ago, you know, when the SIP thing rolled up, for you that don't know, critical infrastructure protection is mandatory compliance with federal laws for cybersecurity and reliability in all North American power plants that are connected to the grid at 100 kV or more. In about a 6 to 24 month cycle, we constantly have new SIP requirements, additional requirements, lots of reporting and demonstration of compliance, and it's everything. It's patches, patch status, patch sources, antivirus backups, just it goes on. And we even have new requirements that went into effect in October for supply chain security, and they're getting pretty rigorous. And I would say in the last 7 or 8 years, we're getting more and more requests from OEMs. They want remote access to the systems. That becomes an issue, especially with more and more OEM control system vendors using offshore people for that remote access. So we've got increasing threats, you know, a lot of O&M cost pressure. We got more requirements. We need to put in more tools. We need more people, but they're telling me to do it with less O&M. So that's why they call it a JOB, right? Also, for us down on the Gulf Coast area, a lot of new generation and transmission assets being constructed. There's load growth on the Gulf Coast that requires new generation and replacing the aging fleet. All these plants, you know, some of them that started up in the 60s are still running. We got to slowly replace those. So this slide says 2015, but this story really starts in about 2013 when we were looking at SIP version 4 was coming, and that was going to apply to plants. And we had about 6 of these big medium plants greater than 1,500 megawatts. And we needed to, that version 4 eventually got canceled and became version 5. So we start looking at our plants. We have every control system out there, and that's just a few on that slide. There's a more comprehensive list later in the presentation. So the companies like GE, Emerson Ovation, Emerson Delta V, ABB, Metso, you got your Rockwell stuff, your Mitsubishi, Toshiba, and the list goes on and on. So we approached the OEM vendors of the systems and said, hey, well, let me get to that in a minute. What is your solution for the tools to help us meet compliance for SIP? We had a small team. We started a department of geographically dispersed OT engineers that serviced plants in a 4-state area. And then while we're diving into this to figure out how we're going to become compliant and secure and reliable all at the same time, our CIO comes to me and says, hey, we're going to put data diodes on all the facilities as well, which means no remote access whatsoever. And we did, but we had to figure that out too. There was a shortage of engineering firms in the North America that really knew how to implement them. A few people in nuclear, but not many. So we had to figure that one out too. So This is an example of our footprint. It's Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Southeast Texas. I'm not involved in nuclear. It was all gas, coal, hydro, petcoke, different various fuel types in the mix. So our needs were to achieve NERC-CIP compliance, which what I call the fundamentals. You need software inventory and a way to deploy patches. Backup and restore was the Achilles heel in our company anyway. The plants were all pretty siloed and they didn't have backup and restore for hardly anything. Maybe one or two plants had a conscientious engineer that was doing that. Malicious software prevention tools, we call them in our world, MSPT, whether you use whitelisting or signature-based. And we needed to be able to do configuration change monitoring. And it's a good SIEM, something to monitor syslog and do alerting based on things that happen in the syslog events. When we went to all these different ABBs, GEs, all these guys, we realized that for each of those fundamentals, they all used a different tool. So for example, I got one plant with say GE turbo controls, then it's got ABB 800XA boiler and balancer plant controls. And then it's got a bunch of Rockwell stuff for like order management, safety systems, things like that. If I go to 3 or 4 different vendors, for example, in the SIEM world, they all use a different tool. They all use a different tool for backup and restore. They all use a different tool for MSPT. And we just quickly realized that we can't just put a different tool from every manufacturer on every control system. We couldn't manage it. You know, you'd have to learn 5 different SIEMs and, 5 different backup and restore systems. So we went on the quest of finding someone that could do things from an agnostic point. In other words, we wanted the same exact tools put on every single control system. And when our people went to each plant, they were dealing with the same tools all over. All they had to know difference was the plant IP addresses and credentials. And we didn't have remote access, so we people have to travel to these plants. You had to carefully geographically disperse those employees. We were told you're never going to find this. No one can do this. No one's willing to do it. But I figure if 50 years ago they can fly to the moon, hit a golf ball, and come back to eat dinner with their family, we could find a way to do this if we had to do it ourselves. So we developed a very complicated bid specification. There were 7 bidders, including Verb Industrial, whose we ended up picking. We needed vendor agnostic. In other words, what we ran into was people like Emerson or ABB. They were like, yeah, we'll try this out. We will do other people's systems. But when it came down to it, there was some anxiety from those vendors. I don't blame them, because you're touching your competitor's system and throwing software on it, and making network connections that vendor may not approve of. And we will also, part of that spec was a centralized data repository. In other words, SIEM logs, especially software inventories for patch discovery and evaluation, which is federal law, has to happen every 30 days. We do it every 15 days. It's very laborious. It's an entire department to do that for over 2,500 pieces of software across the fleet. We wanted a single console in the plant to see the metrics or the data from each of the tools. I want to see if all my say I'm using Bit9, Carbon Black, I'm using it for application whitelisting and the lockdown USB ports. I want to be able to see that and my backups and all of that stuff in one application, even though there's multiple tools in the background doing it. It was a big challenge, and this vendor was the only one that really had all of that and was willing to implement their solutions on any control system. They had already done many of them, and we've done a lot more. And at that same time, we were implementing the diodes across all of the facilities. We started a schedule, a multi-year schedule, and started implementation across sites, sequenced them in. We bought a 2,000 megawatt plant. At one point, we only had 6 weeks to get it compliant. We've done all of these implementations on running plants. You just got to know what you're doing. Mostly you got to know what not to do. So the key features are where we ended up. We actually have agnostic implementation across Emerson Ovation, Delta V, GE Mark 5, Mark 6, Mark 6E, ABB, all the factory talk stuff, RS Logics, Mitsubishi Turbine Controls, Toshiba Turbine Controls, Metso DNA, and there's more that Verve has done for other customers that I wasn't involved in, obviously, but and not having to deal with these separate security suites for each system. We also find that some of those OEMs, their solutions, let's say, they don't meet all the functionality we need for compliance. We want to automate things. For example, it's easy to automate backups for hard drives on computers, but we wanted automated daily backups of network appliances, relays, and this vendor had a solution for all of that. That is huge, to automate and do change detection for all of your network appliances and relays in a plant. Host down, host up alerts. We sometimes know when a computer goes down before the plant even knows it, because we get that message real quick on our phone. I just lost my screen, guys. Can y'all hear me?
We can still hear you. And your slides are still showing up on the screen. So
yeah, it's like my monitor is going through a reboot. But anyway, it'll be nice when it comes back. Okay, here we go. We have a single agent. We can prove and test on all the OEM systems. We have never had an impact on operations. We have actually been installing this stuff while an OEM was doing an upgrade, and they would have a problem, and we were that wild card. They could say, y'all did it, and it's never turned out. It was always something they had a problem with, and as a matter of fact, our vendor would usually help them fix their problem. So we truly have a single console, and you're going to see a little touch of it in just a minute. It's also a lower cost versus hiring 6 or 8 vendors versus one vendor to manage the agnostic solution and supply us with updates and teach us how to use the software and the systems. So key features. Get to that slide. I was there. Okay. We do have all the automatic backups, the host up, host down, logging and alerting if someone changes the configuration, lockdown USB ports, and the list goes on and on. And then we have what we refer to the software stack, and it kind of deviates over time, but that's what this is right here. And basically, it's going to be a SIEM, backup and restore for network appliances, backup and restore for computers, application whitelisting, or if you use signature-based malware protection. But the key is the enterprise reporting. So every hour or two, we have a server behind our diode that sends the data to an outside server, and we can log into that server and see, for example, across, say, 10 or a dozen plants, I need to know everywhere Adobe Reader version, whatever, is installed. We can just do a simple search, and it shows us every device in every plant that contains that piece of software. And for the discovery and evaluation for SIP patching requirements, that is crucial. So this is an example of a dashboard where it's showing all, these are kind of real fancy metrics, but each one of these you can dive into. On this, you can see all the PLCs at a plant. I can see firmware versions. I can see how many of each, say, virtual machines versus physical machines, brand names. Like I said, inventory software is key, very important. If you have a large SIP fleet, plants that fall under SIP requirements, this was probably my favorite feature when we got all this working, that we could, our people that do the discovery could always know 100%. Before we had this, we would actually send people to the plant to do a fresh big fix dump and make 100% sure we had the latest versions. Well, now we've got them centrally all the time. I don't know of anyone else that can pull this off, but I just know it works for us. Also, as all the software inventory, the ports, we're also see all the open logical ports, UDP and TCP ports, and then load CVE databases and get the vulnerability scans, without a bunch of network taps and things like that. This is a more passive method. Backup and restore, like I said, it's really an Achilles heel in that industry. It's never been a thing to do because the plants really don't have the skills for this stuff. But knowing when a backup fails anytime, because I've personally spent many, many days in my career rebuilding workstations because I didn't have backups. So it's near and dear to my heart. In the end, the results are what we've been talking about: to manage OT security and compliance across dozens of sites centrally, without remote access. Of course, I got to send people to the plant for many functions, but we know when we need to send them. Lower labor costs. Senior management comes and says, we want to see your vulnerabilities that you have across the fleet. We can do them now instantly. Looking for software versions. We reduce cost of relay techs by being able to remotely view a relay configuration, for example, that was backed up, and then we can push that configuration automatically. We do to that central server. So a guy, instead of going to 20 substations or 5 plants, he can log on to a remote server and see those configurations to check the settings. And then, of course, the automated backups of all computers, appliances, and relays. And, this has been a years-long venture, about 10 or 11 years for me. And in the end, I have a few recommendations. It's kind of what Mario was saying. Don't just think security. You need to be efficient and reduce the labor requirements. Like he talked about, reducing the number of tools you use. And that is very important. Vendors today are coming to us and say, hey, we got a solution for your plant. They got so many tools, and they got network taps, and they're doing, packet level inspection on gigabit Ethernet, and that's all cool, but I don't have to have that. I've got to get the basic fundamentals of security and compliance, and I keep them working and be able to prove it on any given day that I'm doing it. The vendor agnostic thing, make sure your tools are going to work at as many different places as possible. Do not fall for OEM threats. When you start throwing all this equipment and the software, mainly it's software agents on these systems, it's just all the OEMs that make the control systems for the power industry, which in many cases are the same across the industry. They will try to tell you, you can't do that. We're not going to warranty your system, Well, just don't fall for that stuff. Remember, you're the customer, they're the vendor, and you own the system. And if you fix it, if you break it, then if I break it, then I'll fix it. We still have the OEMs trying to pull that on people and trying to keep them from going somewhere else. Work with a team that has a lot of cross-vendor ICS engineering capabilities, especially in networking. When you implement these systems, there's a lot of careful network configuration that goes on to do it right. And people that understand how the networks in these control systems work. There are many of these systems that have modifications that they're not traditional networks. For example, on a lot of systems, you can't do deep port scans. You will trip the controllers, and there's people trip plants doing that. So you got to be a little more cautious about things like that, and just don't overcomplicate things. you know, there's a bunch of fancy new tools, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. But if you start putting in more and more tools, it's more and more stuff to manage. Just focus on the fundamentals of your endpoint management and keep things simple. And I think for us, it's worked out. We've gone back and forth and had to come backwards a couple of times to really get things simple. The future, we've got a lot of things coming out here. The IoT connections, the Internet of Things, they got all these super cool little instruments with embedded LTE chips in them. And plant managers or engineers find out a vendor's been installing them and reaching out to the internet, sending their machine data when they didn't even know it was happening. As you guys know, we've got an increasing number of ICS-related vulnerabilities. The thing in Florida, I don't know if y'all know about the keyloggers that were found on the SCADA system in Ohio recently. And then, of course, the supply chain risk, trying to fight, you know, the management for the O&M to keep this stuff working. And in the power business, reliability is king. It is, besides safety, reliability is the most important, and they do go hand in hand. And that's about it. This is, if anyone wanted, we provided this. This is a lot of the SIP requirements that we deal with. A lot of those overarching things that Mario talked about, they're all buried in the 485 pages of SIP requirements. And that's all I've got, and I'll be around to answer questions later.
Thank you, Mark. Really good presentation. I like how you bring out the issues of finding a vendor agnostic solutions. I think the installed base continues to be pretty diverse and various versions and ages of systems out there, which makes it a real challenge. I am sure people will have questions about your presentation as well. I am going to pass the baton over to Brian Owen of OSI Soft right now, and not somebody that we would traditionally call an end user, you know, in these situations, but in this case, they are actually an end user. And I'll let Brian elaborate further. So Mark, if you want to turn your video off, and we'll let Brian share his presentation.
Okay, done.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully this is starting to come through. Want to thank you.
We can see in presenter view, Brian. You might want to switch display settings there.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And thank you for ARC Group for not letting COVID impede this awesome forum. And I'm tickled to be a part of it this year. My topic is about high trust software and that it's a community journey ahead of us. And I think it follows quite well behind the comments that Mario and Mark said. And even in current events, we can see how with even with the event in the water treatment system, how when one entity is attacked, it's really an attack on the entire sector. So that'll move forward. Little introduction about OSI Soft. In case some of you might not know us, we do work across many different applications and verticals. I'm very appreciative of our customers. They've been very loyal over the years, and especially, again, a call out to pharma and life sciences, who we are all counting on today to really get this COVID nipped in the bud. And that is near and dear to supply chain. When you think about pharmaceuticals in particular, they have quite long supply chains and even cold chains that we're seeing today with the distribution of the vaccines. And we're very pleased to be a part of supporting the assurance in that space. And then to Mark's presentation in energy, certainly nothing happens without energy. And it really goes across the board with all these sectors. So with that, let's get right into the meat of presentation here. So why is it time for a community approach? And I kind of was reflecting on strategy a bit. Maybe it was because of the political change our country has gone through. But you know, it really got me thinking that we need to have a force multiplier. And in the military sense, that means not only, you know, heavier lifting, but also going faster. We need systems that are efficient, like Mark and Mario were talking about. We have to be able to do more with less. We have to reach farther than just a specific device or within a specific plant site or enterprise. We have to start thinking bigger. And certainly our adversaries are, right? They're outscoping us. They're going up into supply chains, and and they're going deep into components, right? It's really a formidable obstacle we're up against with cybersecurity. The challenges are big, and we need this force multiplier, quite frankly, to catch up. When I think of how complicated this really is, I'm not sure we've even scratched the surface of systems yet. Really, how long can a power plant keep going if it can't get that next supply of raw materials, right? So these are big problems, and we're really still at the very beginning of cybersecurity. One of the pieces that I think about is a presentation by Rob Joyce. He's our newly anointed NSA cybersecurity director. And at a presentation in 2016, Rob said, "We will take the time as a nation state to know your system better than you know it, and to find that way to establish persistence." And that's what we're up against. All nation states think that way, they're resourced that way. And as critical infrastructure, this is a tough problem for us. We need to up our game. So part of this transition to the Biden administration, one of the things that stood out to me was a one-pager that Jay Healy wrote. And I'll probably not do his words justice, but when I first read the one-pager and it said, hey, defense can overcome offense. We can do it. And you know, what are the strategies to get us there? I was first a little shocked that, wow, can we really get there? This is such a big challenge. But other people have been saying it, that defense can win as well. When I even think back at the Super Bowl, at how defense beat offense, it really was, you know, in current events, gives me pause that we can do this. So how do we do it? Is this scope and scale thing, right? We need to invest in all those categories that Mario was talking, not just technology. It needs to be organizational. It needs to be policy. We need to invest in all those things. But when we go to act, what Jay said, and I really believe this, is the way we get that leverage is with engaging the private sector. This is where the real leverage comes in cybersecurity. And it's not like the government is the cavalry coming over the hill. That's an old Western movie, and it's not going to happen for cybersecurity. So sure, let's invest for scale and scope. There's a lot that the government can help with there, but when rubber meets the road, it's really what we do engaging the private sector. So taking that a little bit farther, one of the things that Jay cited was a study from Columbia, the New York Cyber Task Force. And this is a few years old, but the report is very, very timely for our sectors. And one of the reasons I believe that is it was the Cyber Task Force was finance sector centric. This was folks really dealing in the finance sector, and they've quite frankly been at the cutting edge of a lot of cyber threats. Let's face it, they have the money, right? And the criminals go there first. It also means not everything is going to apply out of this, but a couple of nuggets that I pulled out that I think we really want to think about in our strategies is they said, hey, what we found really works well is things that operate on internet scale. If we can do things that work at that scale, it was found to have the most impact, the most benefits, or what they call leverage. The other part is what both Mario and Mark hammered home. We can't just keep adding more and more costs to defenders, right? These solutions have to increase the cost to the attackers and be a very least cost impact to the defenders. Otherwise, we're working against ourselves, and no one can afford that. So those are key strategy points that we need to build on. Maybe to the money slide in this report is too small for you to read here, but when you go back to that Columbia report, and I really encourage you to do so, look at this grid slide that they came up with and spend some time on it. I've pulled out a few things here, but basically what they said is they look back and say, here are the things that helped us in the past. Here are the things that are innovations for the future. And they split it up for enterprise scale, and they split it up for internet scale, cyberspace scale, if you will. So a few of the things I've pulled out here is critical mass of cloud deployment. And I think when we look at our operating companies across all those different sectors that are so important to critical infrastructure, there are places where they can de-risk by moving to cloud deployment. And I think Mario had a great piece on that. And it's certainly true. It doesn't mean you're putting your control systems up in the cloud, but it means your enterprise systems, to the extent they are attack vectors on your operations, your OT networks, a lot of that can be moved to the cloud. Matter of fact, the cloud can be your DMZ. There's a wonderful presentation that the hackers at DerbyCon gave. It's like he was a pen tester, and he said, these guys put their DMZ in the cloud and it destroyed me. All my tools, relied on breaking into the on-prem networks from the DMZ, and instead, all he could break into was the cloud. He couldn't make that next hop. Autonomous defenses, we've heard that in both presentations. Things need to be automated. So important. I love that tagline. Let's let the boring things be done by automation, right? Let's have our people do the really intriguing things that really only people can do. And then software bill of materials is called out as well. And a lot of you may have heard of this initiative already. It's not quite in the regulations that Mark was talking about for NERC-CIP, but as he indicated, those regulations are ratcheting up every couple years, and we expect software bill of materials to get on that required list very, very soon. Cyberspace scale, it might be a little surprising that they called out signed firmware, and I'm almost sure that they were looking at this problem of rootkits and let's face it, a lot of progress has been made on that. Hardware root of trust is real. It's almost hard to buy a device that does not have a TPM chip embedded and the capability to do secure boot these days. How long will it take us to get that into operations? Sure, we have long lead times there, but the point is we're at a place where we can start thinking about it and taking advantage of it. This is strong innovation, especially when you think of what Rob Joyce was talking about. They're going to find ways to burrow in way below any of your detection technology. We actually need signed firmware secure boot to move the needle forward. Another thing that's called out as innovation at cyberspace scale is independent cyber rating systems. And these have really come of age, whether you're talking about the bit sites or the scorecards or other systems. We have found a lot of value, and I'll be giving some examples later of rating systems that operate at cyberspace scale. And then what the task force pulled out was, hey, put your regulatory emphasis on response. And when I think about things like that we've in critical infrastructure counted on for so long, like Chemical Safety Board and NTSB, those kind of response systems are maybe the next step above the certs and the ISACs, right? That's a place where we can, sure, they get in once, the attackers might have a success in one place, good on them. But if it happens in the second place, shame on us. And we need this response learning feedback mechanism to work, I think, even on near misses. And the water treatment system, I count that as a near miss. So hopefully we'll get that kind of emphasis on response. All right. So the report also called out on some things that had their heyday, and call into question, well, will these return? Mario cited certification as something that was helpful in his journey. When we look at IoT devices, will certification play a role? We haven't seen certification have a huge impact yet for ICS, but it's not for lack of trying. There are standards out there. So I'm on the fence on this one. I think it deserves to be discussed. And one of the things I like the most about the Singapore labeling system for IoT is at tier 3. When I look at binary analysis, I get really excited because that's something that can operate at internet scale. You don't actually need to go to an independent test lab at tier 4. That's going to be slow. It's not going to operate at internet scale. But tier 3, I see actually can, and I'm pretty excited about it. All right. So to build on that, what also operates at internet scale, and I think aligns wonderfully with business objectives, is putting reputation at the very, very top. In my experience with cybersecurity, what every company responds to is a threat to their reputation. I've yet to see a company that does not act to ensure its reputation is as good as it can be. I'm sure someone will ask a question to prove me wrong, but that's my observation. So I put it at the top. If you can align your cybersecurity journey and culture and investments to keeping that reputation as good as it can be, I think you'll find it resonates with all the resources needed that a company or even a government can bring to bear. So sure, start with these questionnaires and self-attestations, but realize that's really just at the bottom of the scale. I'm sure that SolarWinds had passed many of these checklists, right? And similarly, testing is good. I'm in the camp that more testing is even better, right? The sum of testing can help us weed out problems. So these test labs bring a lot to the party. We just need more of them, and I'm not sure they really operate at internet scale yet, but I think reputation can get us there. And I hope this slide resonates with you as well. So with that kind of strategic mindset, I wanted to get into a couple of the examples that we've embraced at OSI Soft that I think line up with these strategies. And the first one I want to introduce by way of an example. And everyone is probably familiar with material safety data sheets. It's become just a de facto part of dealing with hazardous chemicals. And they're credited with bringing a community together, right? Before, there was a chemical maker that knew about it, the chemical hazards, and maybe a few other people, but what about everyone that has to handle it? What about the emergency responders? What about the policy people? What about the environmental people? So when you think about the power that material safety data sheets brought to chemical safety, can't we do the same thing for cybersecurity? And indeed, our friends at EPRI, that's the Electric Power Research Institute, codified a mechanism they call cybersecurity data sheets. And it's based on the methodology called technical assessment methodology. And we've been using this now for several years. And we really credit our customers in the nuclear sector for moving this forward. Without someone in the field that's actually expressing interest, it's hard as a supplier to really invest in these things. But we do have a lot of nuclear practitioners, and in fact, they're ahead on a lot of these cybersecurity initiatives for very good reason, right? That you look at someone that really has no margin for failure in cyber, it's nuclear is one of them. And they took this process that was developed hand in hand with EPRI and Sandia National Lab and other industry experts, and they came up with a methodology to hey, how can we come up with a way to create these cybersecurity data sheets that are reusable, that scales to our community of nuclear power plants and beyond, right? So it's a three-step process, and the place where suppliers have the most role is in step one. So I'll kind of show what step one looks like. And step one ends up being some documentation like an MSDS. It comes out in an Excel spreadsheet maybe, and it has this notion of exploit sequences. And what's done here is when you look at your system or your device or component level, whatever it is you're supplying, you break it down into a very structured way with its attack paths, which generally is your logical and physical ports. It's also your storage locations and communication paths. And then there's 28 very specific exploit objectives that you analyze, and that multiplies out. It's a nice bounded assessment, and it gets you to a place where we can explain, just like a material safety data sheet, hey, here is how the system can be attacked. Now, That's not generally the kind of documentation that you're used to getting from a supplier, but maybe we need to have it. We did it for chemicals. We can do it for digital systems. All right, the second part, and this is why I loved Mark's presentation so much, is just because you know, you have a way to be attacked, hopefully you've built mitigations for these things. But not all mitigations are created equal. Not all of them get turned on in the field. And I see part 2 of the data sheet as being a little closer centric to system integration roles or even operation roles, because there needs to be an understanding of the environment, because you're going to go through and you're going to rank, hey, what is the implementation burden? Can I afford this mitigation initially? Can I afford to sustain it, right? Is it, to Mark's point, if I have 5 different backup systems, it's going to kill me. I can't handle that. So this is a nice qualitative way to look at it and come up with scores. And the actual TAM guidance is more detailed than this, but I think you can look at this grid and get a simple example of how you can assess the recommended barriers or mitigations to any given threat and see, yeah, we're going to buy into that one. Or, you know, sometimes there's just surprising things. There are some things that might not be the most effective, you know, from a technical perspective, but when you look at how easy it is to implement and low cost it is to sustain, they get pretty high score, and you go, well, why wouldn't you do that? It's low hanging fruit, right? Okay, so that's our cybersecurity data sheet in a nutshell. I didn't do it justice, and I hope that it's something you'll take a look at. But the next step is, I hope you got the idea. We're really digging in and looking at our technology far deeper than maybe we've ever looked at it, maybe deeper than you wanted to ever look at it. But it's our duty as a supplier to certainly know the products we're giving. It's our duty to document that stuff. And what I've found is that we need tools to help us do that. So this picture, you know, might look like a spider web, and it's not a particularly flattering one rendering of an attack surface. So there's a tool, free tool. I love free tools. This one was sponsored by Department of Energy. Thank you, DOE. It's called AHA, Attack Surface Host Analyzer. And you know, maybe in your factory acceptance test, customer acceptance test, you do the scan and you'll see maybe some attack surface you didn't know you had. And it's an excellent tool. Now, we've been able to get much higher than 9%. I intentionally showed a negative example here, but you can find software that will score very, very well as well. So I would encourage trying this tool. Learn something new about your systems that you didn't know before. And I think that can grow the community. Okay. I think I'm running low on time. I want to jump into the next piece here. And this is getting to root of trust. And this is about the transparency of the software itself. So when we look at a system called FACT, we've been using this because we had 3 main questions. And again, our nuclear customers were saying, hey, we need to be sure that this is legitimate software. Can you prove it to us? And we needed a way to provide those hashes, those certificate chains, and so forth. They needed a way to verify that the software is actually on the system is the right software. And the third question is much harder, is, hey, can we still trust these, right? Is there a newer version, or has a vulnerability been put up against the software we're using? So we use the FACT system to publish that kind of information. It operates at internet scale. Here's an example of certificate chains. When we looked around, there was no place. I asked ICS cert, please guys, can I, please put our certificate chains, and they had no way to do it. So thank you so much, Eric Byers Nadolis, for providing a way to do this. Here's another example of the way we use the system is, in addition to all those hashes, you can see that what are the relationships? Where else are these bits shipped? We can tell that this package is shipped in 10 other packages. That helps us as a supplier to know, oh, if we have to issue a patch, what other things are affected? And finally, it's this notion of having a score, being able to have a public rating. Is all of our software 10? No. I've showed a perfect example, but I can guarantee you not all of our software is perfect. And it's fleeting, right? Software, as it ages, vulnerabilities are discovered, problems do emerge, and those ratings will go down over time. All that's visible with the FACT platform. All right, so I know I've come to the end of my time, and I do want to inspire some action, and I hope all of you, before the end of the week, just try FACT out. Go to the website and test out one of your ICS packages. What we want to do is build a community of all the known good ICS software that will make FACT powerful, make it operate at internet scale. It'll take you a little bit longer to look at things like AHA or EPRITAM. I would hope that you would look at those in the next 3 months, see if you can create a cybersecurity data sheet, or what the heck, download one. EPRI has a library of some that they're sharing. And then, before next year, engage in the community in a meaningful way. One of the keynotes at ARC that reminded me of a community project was the Exxon keynote. He said, hey, we're doing this OPA thing, and maybe that's where you engage for community scale impact. My bet would be, hey, work with your ISACs. I think let's work on getting these near misses reported. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your questions, and thanks for all the great work you've all done in the community so far. To Coin, our founder, Dr. Kennedy, the reason I really believe in this community scale is we've noticed that information, as more people use it, it becomes more and more valuable. Please take that to heart. It's a unique truism. Thank you again.
Thank you, Brian. That's a good way to close out your presentation. And a very good presentation as well. I'd like to ask all the panelists to switch on their video, and maybe Brian, you could stop sharing your screen, and we can all take a couple of questions from the audience here. I encourage people to enter the questions into the Q&A window. I do have a question to start off with that we have here, and that has to do with secure remote access. And please, anybody feel free to chime in on this. I'm not going to pick on anybody unless I specifically call you out, which I'm not going to do for this question. So whoever wants to chime in.
Yeah,
what is the...
I'll jump in.
Yeah, so, okay, Del, and what is the future of secure remote access is the question, and how have things changed? How does this impact cybersecurity in the long term? Do we see more critical OT level tasks being done remotely? Things like conventional VPN technology might be okay for office level tasks or some other things, but is it suitable enough for OT? And I guess, Del, you probably have some strong thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have a lot of remote access use cases. But as I think about the future, I think I really look at how the way the use cases are evolving as a kind of a starting point to answer this question. Namely, there's two things that are driving the evolution: the cloud and just the drive to have a more integrated supply chain. Users, as I see them, both internal and third party, they're trying to access the assets or data that may be on site or increasingly in the cloud, or maybe even multiple cloud environments. So today, they're mostly forced through a single choke point, namely the data center. but we're seeing this really become a problem because of scalability. And really the pandemic, as we've seen, it has really put the spotlight on this issue of this choke point. And we're seeing some of the users scramble to try to scale to up, for example, up the capacity of their VPN concentrator. At the same time, I think it's been almost like a godsend, because it's really forcing organizations to rethink their remote access approach. And maybe it's, helping them to be more flexible and efficient, where things that they thought could only be done on-prem, hey, you know what, actually can be done remotely, if you kind of set up the proper processes and systems. So it feels like a blessing. I think it's actually part and parcel as well to digital transformation. So it really is something that at some point they needed to address as part of the modernization. Technology that I see enabling this kind of future of remote access is what Mario talked about earlier. This is secure access service edge, or as they call it, a SASE model. And this gives you that flexible architecture. So in this technology, like Prism Access, as Mario mentioned, it provides that secure connectivity and the threat services from a centralized gateway in the cloud. So imagine a remote user that needs to access the services, whether they're on site, maybe accessing the actual local HMI, or accessing things that we're starting to see get deployed in the cloud, things like the interface for the digital twin, or the historian data that's in the cloud. You don't want to have to force them through the data center and go back up to the cloud. That just is inefficient, and performance and connectivity issues arise with that. But with the SASE model, you can on demand have the remote access capacity and have that direct access to these different resources, whether they're you're going from one plant to another plant, from home to the cloud, a third-party vendor accessing some of the data repository. Maybe they're managing some of your predictive maintenance systems up in the cloud. So it really gives you that flexibility. That's where we kind of see some of the evolution of the remote access architecture for the future.
You're on mute,
I'm
Larry.
sorry, I'm muted. Anybody else care to comment on that? Thank you, Del.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Larry. I think Del makes a lot of really good points. I would also stress, though, that I think for the future of remote access, we actually need to be looking at the past as well. What we've seen at PAS is a lot of organizations moved very quickly to enable remote access about a year ago, when all of the lockdowns started to hit with the pandemic. And if your organization hasn't gone back to audit what access you enabled, the Oldsmar attack on Friday is certainly a wake-up call that it's time to go do that and really reevaluate what you've provided access to, whether that was necessary, whether you've followed least privilege access principles and other best practices to be able to monitor open ports and connections, whether you truly need 24/7 access or more of a as needed type access is paramount. One of our large global paper and pulp companies also shared with us that essentially from their perspective the genie is out of the bottle. There was a lot of hesitation to the idea of remote operations within this organization, and because they had to go remote, it's now proven that things that people resisted, were naysayers to, are now possible remotely. So choose your metaphor, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube or the genie back in the bottle at this point. And I think it's really important that organizations reassess and audit the remote access that they granted a year ago.
Good point. Anybody else care to comment on remote access? That's okay, because we have a lot of other questions here. And Mario, you had a lot of good comments on sort of building a cybersecurity team, across IT/OT. Maybe you and some of the other people here on the panel could give us some advice on what it really takes to get people up to speed. How can we make people more effective? You know, a lot of companies seem to be somewhat reluctant to spend a lot of money on training and awareness. So, you know, what can our end user participants here take back with them in terms of how, you know, to get people up to speed and you know, get some training in and just make people more aware. Mario, I know more than one person commented in the chat window that they really liked your idea of a cybersecurity moment, you know, along the lines of a safety moment at the meeting. So maybe that's one thing, but maybe we care to comment on some other things that we can do.
Yeah, sure. So from the people perspective, I found that probably having a mixture of people that are already in the company and they understand the business, we need to train them to become the future security experts. So I figure about 40% of them, we changed their career, whether they were network engineers or server engineers or something, or even software developers. And we do a career change and we help them train. We send them to training, SANS and other types of certifications. Many of them have um, undergraduate degree, and we send them and we help them find a master's degree on cybersecurity. So about 40% of them we try to grow from inside the company. The other 60%, 50% of them we like to hire right fresh out of school, and we see huge advantages as well as disadvantages with fresh out of school people, because they have a lot of energy. Yes, they want to do a lot of different things, but don't have the experience and they can make mistakes. So you have to, you know, make sure that you put some boundaries on what they can do. And the other 30% are mid-career people that are working in other industries or in other companies, and they just ready to do a change of companies. So between the combination of these 40, 30, and 30, we are built a very good security team, and is very diverse in many ways, and different backgrounds, and that helps a lot. Now, the more challenging ones of all of them are the ones that are going to do a career change. They have been in the business doing something else in the company for, you know, a minimum of, you know, 5 to 10 years, and you need to uh, kind of work with them. And one of them is doing, I built a scholarship program where we can give a scholarship to these people to get a master's degree, or to do a certification or do something else. That works very, very well. We also give incentives for these people to self-learn, because if they are working in Active Directory, we want them to become Active Directory security expert. So we help them with that career. Many times, the group that they work for, they don't want to make that investment. The same thing with the network. You want to make sure that these people become CCIE in cybersecurity, firewalls. One of the things that I have done is the security team, my security team, does not manage firewalls day to day. However, they are responsible for the firewall policy and the architecture. So many times what we do is some of these people that are managing the firewalls, they work for the network team. We can get them educated so they can become the next expert as part of the security team. So I think it's about education and wanting to do. In the last few years, we have gone through some really bad times in the oil and gas. And happy to say that, you know, we have not cut jobs in cybersecurity. So it's a huge a motivator for people to want to move into cybersecurity. But it's all about training and educating people and getting them to do very exciting things. Like I say, you know, I try very hard to move all the boring stuff out. So you want to get people engaged, learn something new. We can get people to do forensics, people to do threat hunting, people to to do automation and security process simplification. All that stuff is very exciting. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, I think that's a good answer. Anybody else care to comment?
Yeah, I'll comment too.
Eric.
I think Mario nailed it. You know, you want to make this exciting. You want to attract people that are sort of dynamic and want to move and want to do things. And yet too much of the time I see we have way too much busy work, too many spreadsheets. I remember working with somebody, this is about 8 years ago, wanting to do audits, equipment audits, and they were just having their poor guys go out and fill out spreadsheets about all the equipment, go through every plant and look at every access port and everything. I was just like, this is miserable. And you know, this is where a product like John Livingston's Verve platform, you know, get something automated to do the heavy lifting and have the smart guys doing smart things, not fill out spreadsheets. And I see the same thing going on supply chains. I look at people trying to manage a multi-tier supply chain on a spreadsheet. You want to waste your guys' time? Have a party, but they're not going to stick around for it.
Yeah. One other thing is rotation. Rotation is also very important. And I can tell you when I had a lot of problems because I was trying to standardize or at least get OT people to move into IT and IT to OT. And I actually had to get rotation system where people will work for a few months in something else. And that became very successful because people were very happy to learn new stuff.
Larry, I'll just add one quick comment. We're members of the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance. And one of the things that we've been providing feedback as part of our membership is to try and introduce a lower cost entry-level course for basic cybersecurity fundamentals. I spent a lot of time in IT operations earlier in my career, and one of the things that really made the ITIL library of best practices successful was the foundations course. For a few $100, you could take a 2 to 3 day or an online course and get ITIL Foundation certified. And while I agree that the cybersecurity discipline is a very complex discipline and we need advanced credentials, we also need basic entry-level credentials as well. So that's something that we're trying to influence as part of the GCA.
Yeah, I don't think everybody can afford, you know, SANS certifications are great. I'd love to take one, but $10,000 is a little bit outside of my price range. Anybody else care to comment on that issue? I have another issue I'd like to bring up, and it's kind of related to what you were talking about, Eric, and Mario, you mentioned this too. And I think Brian, you mentioned this too. And that's automating the boring stuff, right? I think that's key to what, you know, to the progress of this field of OT level cybersecurity is we do have a lot of sort of repetitive, you know, manual, non-value added tasks that could probably be automated. What do you think, you know, the opportunities are for end users to automate certain tasks in cybersecurity? What needs to be automated? How can that happen? How can we automate the boring stuff, you know, and let people do higher value added work?
Well, if nobody else, I'm going to just give some examples. One of the things that we've been working a lot on is just accurately naming vendors' products so that you can properly search vulnerability databases. I mean, you think, okay, how hard could that be? We were looking at packages from Rockwell Automation. There's over, I think, 55 different ways to spell Rockwell Automation. Believe it or not. So, you know, one of the things when you're doing things manually, you also get a lot of mistakes. And I think it's one of the great things about AI is that you can go and kind of clean up and deal with those mistakes. So one of the projects we've been working on right now is name normalization. Go out and find all the different ways that a particular product was spelled and misspelled and mangled, and they forgot ink and they put limited on the end and they put the period and they didn't put the period. And then, oh yeah, but it was bought by, Active Instruments was bought by Eurotherm, which was bought by CB, which was bought by Invensys, which was bought by Schneider. And so you get this mess that normal humans either don't get or they don't, you just can't find your way through it. And so I think there's a lot, this applies from everything from just getting your asset databases cleaned up to properly searching for vulnerabilities. That's probably the area I've been working the hardest on in the last 6 months.
Yeah, kind of as a follow-on to that, I think the step after you identify assets is kind of automating the process of provisioning policy. You got a new Logix PLC, you kind of know it's going to talk to the factory talk system. And so you create that policy that allows it to connect to the PLCs and the HMIs that are within that subsystem. And that kind of stuff is pretty routine. I think as long as you understand your system well, you can automate those kind of things. I do think some other things, fortunately, hopefully the asset owners don't have to deal with this, but some things around business continuity or disaster recovery where you go through the process. Let's take, for example, all of the systems that are potentially vulnerable and you need to patch them, and the systems that have been infected and you need to quarantine them, and even the process of transitioning from the infected HMI to a clean HMI. Some of these things not only can be automated, but they allow you to, get to the goal of getting back to operations. So it's actually an important task, but a lot of the small tasks that need to be done to make this happen are pretty tedious and routine. So there's even things like that we've seen security orchestration and automation tools have a role for.
Larry, I'd like to connect what Eric was just talking about a moment ago with an earlier comment from Mark in his presentation about sensors and digital transformation. We're absolutely seeing that this challenge of manually accounting for configuration settings for smart sensors is a pervasive and growing problem. You've got configuration settings that are sitting in field device management software and AMS software and historians and DCS and PLCs, and people are manually trying to reconcile configuration settings and comparing that against standard templates and sucking up a huge amount of human resources doing truly boring stuff, and spending time trying to find problems rather than fixing problems. And of course, all of this is critical to enabling all the business benefits of digital transformation. So that seems to be a key area for automation that we're seeing, and certainly projects for digital transformation tend to have pretty good amounts of budget. So this is a good area to start introducing more automation and potentially tap into a budget source to do so.
Absolutely. John, would you care to comment on this issue of automating the boring stuff?
Sure. I think one of the things we found as we looked at the jobs to be done, so to speak, in cybersecurity, from the cybersecurity database that DHS keeps actually NIST keeps up, about 75% of the jobs in cybersecurity are what I would refer to as systems management jobs. They're patching, their configuration management, their vulnerability assessment. They're things that relate to systems management. When you move into OT, in many cases, these systems are not managed today. Right? We don't have these silos that got built up over time in IT around patch management and configuration hardening, et cetera. And so a lot of those tasks right now, Mark talked about it earlier, right, fall in a manual task, right? I've got to go manually patch things, or I've got to manually change configuration settings, et cetera. And so, frankly, it's one of the reasons why we frame what we do as OT systems management, right? The ability to address those labor-intensive processes that have been solved in IT a long time ago, but in OT, they're very different. They're very tricky because of all of these unique systems. And so there is a way to do this. There's a way to bring these IT systems management capabilities into OT. If you have the right skill sets and technologies, et cetera, you can do it safely, and you can take 70% of the labor out by patch management. Let's automate that process, doing it in a way that's safe for OT, but doing it in an automated fashion so I don't have people wandering around with USB sticks trying to do patches or sending WSUS commands to do that. So yes, I think there's a lot of ways you can do that by applying things we learned in IT into an OT environment, but obviously with the sensitivity of how it works in OT to be safe.
Yeah, and I think to that, the best example I've seen in the last few years is when we were able to start doing these automatic relay backups, relays that protect transformers and generators at a plant. The settings are governed by the U.S. government, by NERC. And we were getting violations on someone made a setting change, but no one knew. And in an audit, we found out. Or we had a plant that tripped and we found out somebody had changed the settings and we didn't know that the settings had been changed. Some cases, it was 3 or 4 years before. So that ability to just automatically suck those configurations out and compare them to a baseline. And when we would have an extent of condition, they would send engineers to every single plant, plug it in with a laptop, pulling the data down, bringing it back, putting it on a server while other people were looking at it. Well, now the more relays we connect to that system, the less we have to keep sending people on planes and automobiles to go to plants to do extent of condition for one relay that we found had a bad setting in it. So that's the best example I've seen in a long time.
Thank you, Mark.
If I could add on just one more, when Mark was presenting, he showed a topic near and dear to my heart is using a whitelisting solution throughout different plants. And I believe automation is something that can help get that over the hump. I wish everyone was using application whitelisting for their OT environments because we know it's a great fit, but it's a lot of work to get that initial configuration baseline to be trusted and verified. And I think that's a place where automation, the fax system can help be sure you're not whitelisting something you shouldn't be. So I think it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I do too. Thanks for that comment. I think we probably have time for one more question. I'm going to pick on Mark again. Let's talk about regulatory compliance, Mark, because you're one of the, I think, only end users here who has to answer to some pretty stringent regulatory requirements in the form of NERC CIP. While a lot of the other industries are really sort of voluntary in following 62443 and a lot of other standards. But I'm interested in you and everybody else's opinion. Are we going to see more regulation with cybersecurity? Is that regulation, if we do see it, going to be based on existing industry standards or modeled after existing regulatory frameworks like NERC CIP? What does everybody think about that? Is more regulation on the horizon? And if so, what is that regulation going to be modeled after?
I think more is on the way. And I've seen a tendency with FERC, for example, in the hydro industry, they base all the cybersecurity requirements on NIST models. So I'm seeing a tendency to see the word NIST. As a matter of fact, we just spent about 2 years before I retired last year mapping the SIP requirements to NIST requirements. And that became an advisement from SIP auditors that we start mapping certain versions, certain SIP documents to NIST requirements. And that tells me down the road, they're probably going to start, using the NIST requirements more instead of developing their own.
Right. I think there's a lot of good stuff to draw from out there. Does anybody else care to comment on that?
I think back to when Chris Krebs was heading up CISA. He used to regularly say, we're the nation's security advisor, right? We can't compel you. We can only advise. I think, unfortunately, it's going to take some major high-profile incidents. If you think about the history of OSHA, how OSHA came about, I think, unfortunately, it's going to take some major cyber incident that causes a safety or an environmental issue before we start to see the shift from self-regulation to more government-imposed regulation outside of, say, nuclear and other, sectors. So I think it behooves industry to get started on, like you said, self-regulating, looking at ISA, IEC 62443 now, because it's a question of when, not if.
And we're doing
Well, if you look at SIP 14, for example, is my former employer spent $90 million complying with SIP 14. CIC 14 was a new requirement based on one incident, the Metcalf incident in California, and I won't go into that. Some of you probably know about it. All it takes is one incident. Everybody knows about it. It gets a lot of press. The supply chain thing with SolarWinds, fortunately, we just in October had new supply chain requirements, but we probably will have more added be based on that one SolarWinds event. So there's a lot of knee jerk, that happens there, for lack of a better term.
We also see this globally, though. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon, a North American phenomenon. Every country in the Middle East is going through very, very stringent regulatory requirements around OT security, those that didn't have it already. Europe, similarly, slightly different in each geography. I don't think there's a question that this is coming. And this is back to the point of efficiency, right? Everybody talks about, oh my God, the hackers are coming. Yeah, they are. But you know what's really coming is the regulators and the CISOs and the insurance companies.
Yeah.
And those guys are going to show up at your doorstep. And if you're trying to do this with manual operations, no automation, and a bunch of OT engineers running around trying to do cybersecurity, it is going to be like a tidal wave that hits. And so, yes, we need to worry about the hackers, but in terms of how we keep these plants running and keep our people sane, not safe, but sane, we have to find some way to streamline and make more efficient this systems management functionality. It's just not feasible without it.
Yeah, John, I totally agree. It has to be that way. And at the same time, cyber has come to the world stage. It's a national security threat, and we've seen that there will be bans on specific, even chips, right? So you have to know what's in your technology. That requirement is imminent.
And say what you will about Gartner. For a couple of years now, they've been saying that it's around the corner when CEOs and boards are going to be held personally liable for cyber incidents on their watch. I think insurance. Most of those individuals are going to carry insurance. The companies can also carry insurance on them. So the chance of them being sued or carted off in an orange jumpsuit may be low, but when Gartner is making statements like that, people are going to listen. Boards are going to listen. Nobody wants to be the first company where their CEO or their board gets sued for a major cyber incident.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot more interest on the part of companies like Moody's, for example, profiling risk in various industry sectors and for various companies. So it's not just regulators, it's credit rating agencies and bankers that are going to be coming to your doorstep as well. We are out of time. We're actually a little bit over, and we just did not have time to get to all the questions that we had. But I think this has been an excellent discussion today. I want to thank all of you for participating today. I think you all did an excellent job. As you can see, this is, not kind of one of these, fluff kind of sessions where you're going to get some surface level information. We went really deep here. I thought we talked about a lot of important issues, and these presentations and videos are going to be available to forum attendees later. If you want to step in and ask more questions of our panelists and our presenters here, we also have a chat room in the vFairs main website under networking. We have a channel there for cybersecurity. So if you want to go in there and ask some more questions and maybe connect with some more people, you're welcome to do that. But I want to thank everybody again for coming. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you next year in real life, as they say, in Orlando. So thanks again for this great session. And we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you, the attendees, too, for coming and staying with us for so long. Thanks, everybody.
Well done, Larry, coordinating it all.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye there.